Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the History Series sponsored by the Ritter Public Library, the Vermilion Area Archival Society, and the Vermilion History Museum. I'm glad to see everybody tonight. Tonight we're going to have Dan Dean and Sandy Needing talking about Vermilion on the Lake. Dan may know what he's talking about, but you got to keep an eye on him. And with that, I'll turn it over to them.
Welcome, everybody. May I ask, first of all, anyone here who grew up in VOL? Okay, great. Good to have you with us. We're going to talk about our memories of VOL, and he and I live next door to each other, so we aren't covering the whole area. When I talk about VOL, I'm talking basically about the area of Vermilion on the Lake that went from Claremont Road, which is over on the far east next to Shawsey Park, over to Aldrich Road on the west, where the Y is now, it used to be Lake School. The area that's known as Edison Estates was not a part of that originally. That was originally one great big field full of evergreen trees owned by Ohio Edison, thus the name Edison Estates. Vermilion on the Lake, for those of you who don't know it, was a self-incorporated little village, a village unto itself. And gradually, as the city of Vermilion grew, well, it was the town of Vermilion then, but became a city, as it grew and surrounded us, eventually, I think it was in the early 1960s, don't quote me on that, it was annexed into Vermilion as part of Vermilion City. My family moved there in about 1946. I was 4 years old. You do the math. At that time, there were maybe 100 permanent families in the entire village. That's it, about 100 permanent families. The rest of Vermilion on the Lake was cottages and empty spaces. We have in our archives somewhere some old pictures of Vermilion on the Lake when it was just rutted dirt roads and a cottage here or a cottage there and lots of trees. It was a summer vacation spot. Down by the lake, a log cabin dance hall was built. I don't know when. I do know that my father talked about going out there in the 1930s, coming from Lorraine, and going out there for dances at that time. But gradually, the cottages built up. And on our street, my house was at the far south side of the street, right across the street from the railroad tracks. Then about a third of the way down were the Biners. About half the way down were the Sakas, and at the very far end of the street was the Breen family. We had 4 whole permanent families on our street. Danny's family moved in a little bit later, ended up building 3 different houses right next to us. They started with one, outgrew that, and went to another one, and so on. But it was an interesting time in the village. Here you had a village that had its own police department, had its own council and mayor, of course, had its own fire department. At that time, the beach was wonderful, and one of the Pierce girls brought pictures of that beach and the clubhouse, as it's now called, and what it looked like with all the beach and the slides and everything else down there. And it was all open to the public. Everybody could go down. They could walk down the steps, sit out under the balconies, walk down on the beach. It's not there anymore. You can sit on the clubhouse, look down, and you see a bunch of rocks. The beach is pretty much washed away and is not there for us. But I can talk mostly about the fire department because my father, Max Yeamans, was the fire chief in VOL. Now, it was a volunteer fire department. My father was very proud of it. A lot of men who worked there. But you didn't have cell phones, of course, or anything like that. We had something called fire phones in the houses of the firemen, hung up on the wall in the kitchen at my house. The fire phone would ring. Someone would answer it, get the information about where the fire was, and then there was a button on the fire phone. and you pushed it, off went the siren. And you held that button in until the siren got it to its highest, then you let it go and let the siren come back down again, and then you pushed it again. Well, at my house, especially at night, if it went off, my father and I seemed to be the only two upstairs who heard it. So I ran down to answer the fire phone because Dad had to find his britches and his shoes and things. So I'd run down and answer the fire phone, get the information, start ringing the siren. Now, mind you, I'm like 12 years old, 13 years old doing this. And then I'd stay on the phone until somebody down at the fire department at the station said, okay, you can stop now. We've got enough guys here to go out and take the fire call. That's what the fire phones were. And it worked. It worked very well. Now, I don't know, was your father a fireman?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. What else was your dad in the
Well,
village?
Dad was mayor. We moved to from Nokomis Park down to VOL, and that was 1948, I believe. And Dad was mayor in 1950 to 1952. Your mother was clerk of council for my dad.
I didn't even know that.
Yes, yes. Max was fire chief, of course, and oh, geez, so much was going on. I was just a little run. It's hard to remember a lot of that, but we had a good time in Vermilion on Lake. I was part of the Rat Pack, so to speak. You could get away with just about murder during the day or night. You knew every lock that wasn't locked when no one was around. And I see some Pierces laughing back there. We knew every street, every alley, every shortcut through the village. I delivered papers as a kid. Those streets were so long.
Oh, they were.
Oh, you get 30 newspapers or 40 newspapers on the back of a bicycle, and one customer was down in Berkeley, and the other customer was down in Edgewater, and you had to go up and down, all the way from Claremont to Aldrich. Yeah, Aldrich. We had the pond down there, speaking of Aldrich, down by the VOL bridge. And my buddy and I, when the lake was rough, too rough to swim in down at the clubhouse, we would get on and walk. We lived in Devonshire. Walk down the railroad tracks, which is a good mile on the railroad tracks, all the way down to the pond and swim in the pond. Thought nothing of it. Walk back on the railroad tracks. We'd pick blueberries and raspberries.
Elderberries.
And elderberries.
Yep.
And they were, of course, soot covered from the steam engines. But we didn't, we ate them anyway. What else did we get into?
Well, you were talking about the pond, which my family called it the quarry. Actually, have you seen it as you go? You've seen it, I'm sure, as you go over the bridge, heading toward the pit, and there's this big pond or quarry over to the side. That, I understand, is where the dirt was dug out to make the bridge, to make the roadway for that bridge. Because at one time, it was just flat. And there were a lot of accidents there. Rich alluded to that in one of his Vermilion Views articles. And there were tons of accidents where cars were coming across, and of course the railroad crossed there. But there were blue racer snakes at that quarry. And I guess it was a pastime of several people to go down and throw rocks at the snakes and kill them. And it's my understanding that there are no longer any blue racer snakes in the area. That's sort of a shame. I wasn't allowed to go down there. My mother was very strict, and I was allowed to ride my bicycle in the village. I was not allowed to ride my bicycle out of the village. Number one, there weren't any sidewalks out of the village to head toward Vermilion. At that time, there was Alberta Beach and Nokomis, but in between, you had open fields, and that's where the fishermen dried all their fishing nets. And it's also where an area of peach trees were. It was orchards. Thus, Alberta Beach, Alberta peaches. You get the idea? Yeah. You knew something about the policeman, the police chief. I don't remember him.
Oh, the Gerhard Clausen.
Clausen, that's right.
He was chief of police, and the whole police department, it was part-time, and they all worked at the steel plant. Gerhard Clausen being head of security at the steel plant, where my father worked as and mayor.
And where my father worked.
And then Skip Griffith, part-time police officer, Russ Blakesley, part-time, Walt Strict, and I'm missing someone, but I'm not quite sure.
I don't remember the names.
But we all, as kids growing up, and as we got older, 12, 13, 14, teenage boys, we all knew the police didn't come on duty till like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So you had to run in the village pretty much. You could get away with a bank robbery almost, but you had to be off the streets at 5 o'clock.
There were no banks down here.
No, there weren't any banks, but we had one incident. I had a little scooter, a moped scooter, and back then you didn't have to have an operator's license, just a plate on it. And I would drive that thing. I saved all my paper money, bought this little scooter and rode it all over Vermilion on the Lake. And then one day Walt Strick, who was the part-time officer, comes and he's in the 55 Ford Fairlane police car with a big siren up, mounted on the front of the hood. And I'm driving my scooter, and all of a sudden flashing lights and, you know, and he pulls me over, and he wants to do a safety check. And I passed, was okay, no problem. Well, he continues to follow me around, up and down the streets. And I'm looking in my rearview mirror, and there's Walt right behind me in the police car. Nothing else to do, obviously. Up and down the streets, up and down the streets. So I get all the way over in Aldrich, down on Edgewater, and I come east on Edgewater all the way down to Overlook. And I'm doing 25 miles an hour, exactly the speed limit. And I look in the rearview mirror, and he's right on my tail. And I didn't think too much of it, so I waited the very last minute to hit the brake at the stop sign at Aldrich and Overlook. He almost hit me. I could hear the tires squealing and everything. I thought, I'm dead, man. You know, well, I got nervous, and I shot up the street, and I pulled in the driveway at home, and he's right behind me. Sirens, lights. Well, my dad comes out, and what's going on, son? Walt comes in, he's red-faced, and he says, a kid almost got in a wreck and went through a stop sign. And I tried to explain to my dad, he was almost the one that got in the wreck. But Dad, give me the keys. That ended that. So a couple of days later, my buddy and I were sleeping out. We slept out. We had a pup tent out in the side yard. And back then, as kids, we didn't get mad. We got even. So we're sleeping out one night, and I was still fuming about Walt Strick trying to arrest me. We tiptoed down to Walt's house, and we knew he had to be at the steel plant at 7 a.m. So we get down there about 2:30 in the morning, and his car is sitting in a driveway. We undid the valve stems from his tires, and you know how loud hissing air on a warm summer night is? And we let the air out of 3 tires before we got nervous and left, you know. But we got even, we thought, you know. We had, who else did we have down there? Yurvich's, they had the little grocery store down on Edgewater right across, cattywampus from the clubhouse. The best 25-cent malted milkshake, and the Pierces know about that. Ann and Carol Yurvich, they were twins. You're Ann and Carol, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Because I was in love with Ann, or was it Carol?
He couldn't keep
I
straight.
can't, yeah. Don't mention me. Don't mention me. Other than that, anybody got any questions? There's a quiz later. You better ask now.
A little bit more about that clubhouse, which, as I said, it started out as a log cabin dance hall, and it, believe it or not, served as a church for a while. My church, Trinity Lutheran Church. When we started the church in 1957, needed a place to meet, so the clubhouse was available, and we'd go in on Sunday mornings, and you'd have to pick up all the beer cans and things from the activities of the night before, and you open the windows and doors to, you know, clear out the smell, and close some drapes that we hung across, and put up a portable altar and lectern, and then have our services. And more than once, I guess people saw, of course, the doors were closed to the balcony, but more than once people saw a rat running across the balcony. You know, you live near a lake, you're going to have that kind of thing. But it did serve as a church for like 3 years, and now it's a part of the Vermilion Lot Owners Association. I can't speak a whole lot to the Lot Owners Association. It came about just about the time that I was getting ready to leave to go to college and things, and I wasn't paying attention to history at that time. I do know, though, that there was a problem with the incorporation. There were sort of two factions, and my dad was on the faction that did not want to incorporate into Vermilion. Why? It was strictly because of fire insurance. My dad had worked with the American LaFrance Company to design and build a big fire truck for Vermilion on the Lake. It was a big white truck. Some of you may have seen it around town. It lasted here for a long, long time. But Vermilion on the Lake had excellent fire insurance rates because we had this wonderful big fire truck to take care of that small area. Dad was afraid that if we incorporated into Vermilion, we'd lose those wonderful fire insurance rates. I don't know if we did or not, but we still incorporated. But it actually caused some tension between families who had been friends for many, many years.
Yes, it did,
I guess
definitely.
there,
Yeah.
there was some. I don't know which
Yeah.
side your dad was on.
I
but-
don't remember, but
but
I
you
do
don't.
know everybody was arguing, yay, nay,
Yeah,
yay,
right.
which way, do we want to be under the wing of the city of Vermilion, but
The Ayes had it. They
yeah,
won.
Yeah. Boy.
And Lake School was built down there, and I don't remember the year. When that school was built, by that time Ford had come in. In 1959, the Ford Motor Company came in. That's when the village really changed. All these summer cottages that were down there suddenly became year-round residences. And people had to winterize and add to them, cover up most of the houses were built on piers, on, concrete piers. Close those in, winterize so your pipes wouldn't freeze. Oh, I remember having pipes freeze in our house during the wintertime. And that's when the village really blossomed. Gosh, when I was in school, one school bus came through and picked up all of us in the village of all grade levels. I remember riding the bus with Joyce Zielinski-Nickley. Some of you may know her. Judy Woods Griffith. We were all on the same bus. They were high school students, and I was still, in elementary, junior high at the time. But when Ford came in and the town suddenly bloomed and grew so suddenly, that's when Lake School had to be built to take, so many more elementary students. It started out as a school with only 5 grades in it, 1 of each level. There wasn't kindergarten in Vermilion yet at the time. And my mother was a first grade teacher there. My mom taught school here in Vermilion for all the years I can remember until her death. The school grew, and it was added on to over the years. I was an elementary school librarian there for 12 years, and then I served all the elementary schools in Vermilion. So it was a pretty busy place, and of course now it has become the Vermilion YMCA. What else? Questions? More, please. Please do. Come up here and speak into the microphone if you would. We're putting this on tape for the oral histories. You want to use that microphone?
You have to click the switch on the bottom.
There's a switch on the bottom to click. Just pull it up.
Hello.
Is it on?
Hello. No. No. Yes. No. Let's leave it on. Maybe. Hello. Hello. Hello.
I think it's on now. It's,
Right. Pull it out of this thing.
there you go.
Light on the bottom. No. Click the switch.
Okay.
All right.
Introduce yourself.
This is way more trouble than it's worth, believe me, okay?
No, it's
I'm Terry Brady. I'm one of the trustees of the clubhouse. And we have a little bit of history. We know it was built in 1919. We don't know if it was
100 years old.
begun or finished, but we know it was built from logs felled right on the property. They built a sawmill and built the clubhouse from the trees that were there. The Vermilion on the Lake Company is who owned the clubhouse, And in the late 50s, they agreed with the Lot Owners Association to turn it over if the Lot Owners Association would pay the taxes and maintain it. That happened, but Barb and I moved in '99, I think, and I think there were 10 members of the clubhouse at the time, and we rented it maybe 10 times a year for weddings and whatnot. But the lakefront had long gone away, and it was in bad repair, so we tried to get together some of the local residents, and it turned out that because the ownership was with the Lot Owners Association, we weren't able to get any public funds because it was privately held. So in 2006, the Lot Owners Association took a vote and voted unanimously to turn it over to a charitable trust. So it now belongs to the Vermilion on the Lake Historic Community Center Charitable Trust. Repeat that for me, will you?
Say it again.
Yes, the Vermilion on the Lake Historic Community Center Charitable Trust. And that's who runs it. It's a board of trustees. And as we started I don't know how many of you remember, but the ladies' room used to be upstairs.
Yes.
You go up these dark stairs over a floor that went like this and into this awful bathroom. So the first thing we did was move the ladies' room down and take part of the porch for that. Then our neighbors started cleaning the place up, and as we had more rentals, we had more money, so then we put more money into it, and because it looked better, we got more rentals. You get the picture. So I believe last year we had 120 rentals. We also have 8 weeks of fish fries that the board puts on, which is going on right now for the Fridays in Lent. But the other issue that I wanted to mention was you were asking about, anyway, it's not owned by the lot owners anymore. It's now the trust. And everything, it's all volunteers. Everything that we make from the weddings goes back into the clubhouse. And I believe we've spent on the order of $100,000 the last 2 years on our lakefront, which you all know is very expensive to maintain. But we have managed to keep the building from sliding into the lake, so that's a good thing.
What have they put down there, Terry? I understand there's some large rocks. What have they
a
done?
lot of armor stone. We've stayed out because it was an emergency. We had Herc do the work, and we bought just a lot of armor stone, very big, heavy stones, and we've managed to keep the lake from tearing it apart.
In the pictures that the Pierce sisters brought, you can see a beach that's probably 20 feet at least or more. They're going to show them afterwards, or I don't know if you want to pass them around, but
There was 600 feet of lakefront there.
this way, but I mean
Yes,
out into the
right.
lake. And there were piers and everything else. It's a shame to lose that. But Vermilion on the Lake lakefront suffered the same fate that Lorraine's lakefront did. Erosion. There was a house I used to go play in during the summer. A family came up from, I don't know, Florida or somewhere, and I would go and play with their daughter. Big 2-story home. And as my husband and I would drive our boat down that area, I started noticing the house was sticking out more and more over the cliff. The cliff was just eroding underneath it, and finally the house was torn down. And this has happened. And I'm thinking of all these big homes that have been built down there now on the lakefront and cost several $100,000. And I keep wondering what they're doing to keep that cliff from eroding, because it's a shale cliff, and you know it's gonna fall apart after a while. Terry, I'm sorry. Did you have more that you wanted to say? Oh, thank you so much for your help on that. Anybody else who wants to share some memories of VOL? I feel like I've talked. Anita, how about it? Do you want to come up and say something?
No, just little thing. I remember when they used to have to tar the roads. They drive up and down with that black
Yes, tar and chip.
tar and chip.
Roads, yes.
That was,
You could go out on 6 and 2 and speed up and down the road and cut into the VOL, and the cops couldn't come
It
But-
sounds like we were all trying to get away from the cops all the time. We weren't.
Four of the guys that lived down there were coming up from the beach, and the cottage was rented out to some girls from Lorraine on the end of Delamere.
Yes.
And their boyfriends were down visiting, and they jumped their four guys from BOL coming up from the beach and beat them up at night. So the next night, the guys down there kept calling all of the people. They had the whole football team. They started a little store and walked around the clubhouse. By the time they got to that cottage, there had to be like 60 or 70 guys. They had the sheriff down there. They had Mayor Brombach down there.
Oh my gosh.
They didn't get to a fight. They finally broke it up, but I used to live 3 houses down from Brombach.
Yeah.
He was a four-base
Yes.
guy. Down in the middle of the winter time, brushing his sidewalks and everything off
Yeah.
with no shirt on. Snow coming down.
Harold Brumback. Harold Brumback was one of the mayors that we had. I can't remember all the different mayors' names, but he was one of them.
Granddaughter lives in that house now.
Oh, okay.
Jeez,
Moved
wow.
down there at 55, and I'm still down there.
That's
I went from Altamont to Roxborough to Cummings to Edgewater. So I've been down there since I was 72 now. I've been down there since I was 9 years old.
she mentioned the.
There are 2 roads down there that's never been put through. The road next to my house is supposed to be Marlboro Road. It's never been put
No, it
through.
never was. Never finished.
And then Mancine is between Kensington and Claremont. It's never been put through.
Right.
They put Kensington through in the 60s because I remember they
Right.
had 3 model homes there because one of the
Right.
homes was called the JFK and the Eagle on the ground.
Oh, yes, I remember that. Well, you mentioned the cottages and the riots and things. At the end of Devonshire, on the lake end of the road, there were 2 cottages that were identical. They no longer are. But we kept them separate because one was the red roof cottage and one was the green roof cottage. And they were weekly rentals and frequently were rented out to groups of young folks. And it was frequently boys in one cottage and girls in another cottage. There were panty raids.
Yeah.
And the police were called more than once during the summer to go to those cottages. Both houses now are full-time residences. One has had almost like a widow's walk put up so that they can
Yeah.
see the lake from the top floor of the house. But that happened. And, do any of you remember hearing of Bodemer Florists in Elyria? Well, the Bodemers had a summer cottage on Devonshire. And Joni their daughter Joan was just a couple of years younger than me, but she'd always come up to my house and she'd stand out in front of the house and, Sandy, and she'd want me to come out, and spend some time with her. And if I'm not mistaken, the Bodemers also had the store for a while,
Yes.
and so did the Urbanics.
I don't remember the Urbanics. I remember the Bodemers.
You're too young.
Yeah, and the Yurovich.
When all the summer cottages used to have names.
That's true. Some of the summer cottages did have names.
And they had the showers on the outside because our house had
Yeah.
a shower outside. You could shower off before you
True.
come in to get the sand off of you.
Right, because everybody wanted to spend time at the beach. And like I said, the beach was all open then. Everybody could go down. It was a public beach. And
We used to sleep on the beach at night down there, campfire, and sleep on the beach, and the little rats you'd hear them
Oh, yeah.
scurrying around, and you're trying to sleep.
Any other questions or any other remembrances to share? I'm sure there's more that I just have forgotten. Please. No, once the Lot Owners Association took it over, but remember, I was down there a long time before that. Come up here and speak. Oh, okay. All right. All right. The Pierces moved, in case you can't hear or in case it isn't being picked up on the mic for videotaping, the Pierce family moved in 1958. They lived right on the lake, right next to the clubhouse. Yeah, 2 houses, right? Yeah. And she said that once the Lot Owners Association took it over, then it was not open to the public. But I'm talking about when I was a little kid. And I was down there a lot longer than they were. I'm a lot older. Yes, Rich.
Kunzlers. Bob Kunzler.
Yeah.
He worked at U.S. Steel also. He was my supervisor when I first started there. Yeah.
And his daughter Karen was in my class in school.
And Claudia, the
I don't-
daughter.
Yeah. Karen was the oldest one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then, oh, I can't remember the name. Terry, help me out. The last name started with an S. The people who owned it recently, they were very active with the Vermilion on the Lake Clubhouse and the Loudoners. Pardon? That may, yeah, Sasala. Sasala's owned it. I don't know who's in that house now. Beiners, who lived on our street at first, there were two houses of Beiners. There was a big old two-story type of cottage home that the elder Mr. and Mrs. Beiner, Grandma and Grandpa Beiner, lived in. And then there was a small concrete block house that Earl and Betty and their two daughters lived in. Earl was a real estate agent. And he managed probably 3/4 of the property in VOL. Just a few years ago, the little house that had been his office was moved, and underneath it, they found a handwritten ledger that Earl had written in it everyone's rental, payments. $25 a month for this house, $45 a month for that house. And I wish Carol Beiner, his oldest daughter, could have been here tonight because she has that ledger. It was given to me by the man who found it. I gave it to her. And she's unfortunately on vacation, and I couldn't have her come and talk about her father's business. But her father, like I said, must have managed 3/4 of the property down there, and was very passionate about his
Yes.
love for the
Oh, yeah.
village. Yes. Well, the tornado that went through Lorraine, that was 1929. That I don't know. Maybe it was the 29 tornado, because it came in off the lake. So it may have been that one. I'm not sure. Because how many slides are pictured in there? 2? Yeah. It was quite common in those days on all of these lakefront beaches to have these huge slides. And I don't mean like a 5 or 6 steps up slide. I mean, 25, 30 steps up to go down, and then you slide down into the lake. And Vermilion on the Lake had them. Ruggles Beach had them. I don't know who else had them. But all that's long gone. That was long gone before any of us were around. Right. And like I said, my dad danced there in the 30s. Yeah.
There were.
Bands played there, and we know that sometime in 1957 we have an ad, or in the mid-50s, we have an ad that shows Chuck Berry played there,
Oh my gosh.
and with his new song Maybelline.
Oh, dear.
They used to roller skate there also. I remember roller skating there. I think I was like in junior high school. Crystal Beach Park at the ballroom, and then they roller skated on Sunday afternoons there at the clubhouse. And a great dance hall, yes.
Yeah.
Dancing out on the veranda.
Yes, that was nice.
Three
Yes.
plays for a quarter on the Wurlitzer. Yes.
By the time our church had moved in there, I was the pianist for the church, and there was a bandstand. I think the bandstand is gone now, isn't it, Terry? Is it still there? Okay. I haven't been there for a couple of years. But there was a grand piano with only 2 legs. The back end of the grand piano sat on the bandstand, so it was nice and level. Those are my memories. I can't think of anything else offhand unless you have questions.
Do you remember when the church was there? I used to go to church with you guys at the Lutheran church, and there was a coal-fired furnace down in the basement.
Oh,
And you'd
yes.
hear them down there poke, and they'd throw in this coal, and this black smoke would come out of the
registers.
out of the registers up in the, oh my goodness, and it was cold in the wintertime there. Oh my.
Well, the church did put in a different heating system. They
Yeah.
were big heating
Big
units that hung from
gas.
the ceiling. And I don't know. I know. Well, that was a long time ago.
But they were only gone like 5 or 6 years ago.
Oh, okay. So they worked all that time, huh?
Well, they didn't necessarily.
Not that well, but I'm glad to hear that they were useful.
They used to have a caretaker couple on the east end, up on the second floor,
Oh, yeah, above the
that
bar.
lived there, yeah, above the bar, lived there all year round.
Yeah, we had a caretaker there for a while, and then we had rotating people in and out. The woman who cleaned the place for parties lived up there, and now they're turning it into a bride's room.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay. Yes? Yes, it was much smaller, of course, but yes, that is where the fire station was kept, yeah.
Fire station, police station, mayor's
Oh,
office,
that's right, everything
and
was in that
jail.
building.
Yeah,
Oh, I
and
remember the jail.
I do.
Oh. Well, his dad was the mayor, so he got to play around down there. But yeah, in fact, we had 2 fire trucks at one time. The old one, and then that nice brand spanking new white one that my dad was so proud of. Yes?
It was controversial because they didn't want to give it to Vermilion.
Yeah, right. Well, I think didn't it pretty much stay with the fire station number 2 down there? Or did they take it uptown? Did they? Yeah. It finally bit the dust. It was a long time ago. I have a picture at home, and I've got to find it so the Archival Society can copy it. A picture of my father in his full uniform. Oh, he loved to dress up in his full uniform. And getting the keys from Dick Baker for the new truck.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it was fun.
You had a 57 Mercury,
Yep.
red, and your dad painted it white to match the fire truck, didn't he?
Oh, I don't remember that.
Yes.
It's quite possible.
Yes. Yes.
I was getting ready to go off to college in those days, so I wasn't paying
okay.
attention to things like cars.
Okay. But I recall he bought that 57 Mercury, and it was bright red, and then he designed that new fire truck, and I don't know how long we had that white fire truck, and all of a sudden Max came home one day with this, the red Mercury is now white to match the fire truck.
That
Yes.
figures. Well, and the fire phones were long gone too, and we
Yeah.
went to better systems of getting a hold of people. But I'm sorry, I can't think of anything else. I thought I'd be able to talk for 45 minutes, but I can't. Please, Jenny.
Sandy, my husband, when he knew I was coming here tonight, he was talking about VOL and his memories of VOL, and of course, he grew up right here in Vermilion. But he was a jumper, they would call him, the young boy that was on the milk.
The milk trucks. Please come up and talk about it.
And he, well, you all probably can hear me.
Well, but we need to get it on the tape. That's the reason. Jenny's talking about the Mauer-Weichel dairy truck, which drove up and down the streets and delivered our milk to our doors. Go ahead. Pull that down to face you, or take it out of the.
I don't know how.
Just pull it up. There you go.
I don't know how
There
to
you go.
do this.
There's a switch on the.
It's not on.
There's a switch.
There's a little switch on the back.
There you go.
We'll get this figured out.
It's
There,
on.
that's good.
He was talking about VOL, and it was in the 40s, and he was just this young boy and getting his first view of what went on in this wild town of VOL. And he was saying he worked with Mac McDaniel.
Mac McDaniel, yes.
And most people know him or his son, Kenny. And he was just a young fella, you know, and they would just go along VOL, and VOL would swell enormously in the summertime. All those cottages had very many people in. They just weren't one family. And the red and green cottage he remembered very well because the red one would be all girls or vice versa, and the other all the boys. And he was, or whatever you would call him today. And he was telling about delivering the milk, and he would say they would have to come back to the milk company here on Washington Street, at the end of Washington Street, and get it filled up at least 2 times and sometimes 3 times. And because of all the people living in those rentals, they would just come out and buy the milk right from the truck. So they would end up having to go back and get it filled up all the time. But he was talking about the red and green. He really got his education because one was the girls and one was the boys. And in the morning when you were delivering the milk, you weren't quite sure which was which because they came out of both houses. And that's, he was just telling me about that and about Earl Biner, and that he rented most of those cottages out.
Yes.
And he had a little building that happened to be, it sounded like that it was right out by the street, and I don't know which street. It wasn't where he ended up with
No.
his.
That little house that she's talking about, the little building, sat on the corner, kitty-cornered, of Overlook, which goes from Liberty Avenue all the way down to the lake, to Edgewater, and Berkeley, which ran along the railroad tracks. And it sat catty-cornered. Elmer Gall owned it first. Elmer was also, I believe, a real estate agent. And I got to go in and type on the typewriter, and I got paid 2 cents for working. But then Earl took it over as his real estate office. So that's the one that your husband remembers.
Yeah, it probably is. And he said Earl did this every summer, and from what he said, I think that little one was only for the summer.
Possibly.
That he kept that open, but he was quite the realtor, and he was such a nice person.
Very much so.
So, but he was just talking about his memories, and it's too bad he isn't here
Yeah.
because he really had a lot of memories.
Well, tell him I said shame on him. He should have been here tonight, too. But thank you for sharing that, Jenny. Go ahead and leave it on. It's all right.
Okay.
The Mauer Weichel snub-nosed dairy truck, I believe Rich Tarrant's brother, did he deliver for Mauer Weichel? Al,
Al did,
because he would come down and you'd put your empty bottle out on the front step with this little flag, chocolate milk, orange juice, buttermilk, or whatever. And we, as kids, we'd go down there, and he would give us ice off the truck. And if you're only like one of us, we could get on, and I remember riding with him up and down the streets, and he'd give me a quart of this or that, and I'd run it up to the house and bring it back, and he was basically lazy like Rich, I think.
Al was one of the jumpers, too, because I remember Mac McDaniel driving the truck and Al, jumping. And at my house, we had a silver milk box, what it was
Yes.
called, that sat out on the front
Yes.
steps. And you put the old bottles, of course, the bottles got reused, heaven forbid. You put them in, and they'd pick those up. And then we had that fan thing with all the different kinds of things you wanted. And you left that hanging out, and they would fill your order for you.
Yes.
I remember that, too, very well.
Boy.
Good old days.
Your dad built that nice big sandbox. Do you remember that sandbox he built
Oh,
out
in
of
the side
plywood?
yard, yes.
Oh, 8 foot by 8 foot square, and here come the whole truck with the sand and dumped it in there. And then the next day the cats came.
Yes.
Yeah,
It was their sandbox.
yeah.
I also remember the railway men. Now, Danny mentioned the steam engines. My house was right on the corner, and there was a railroad track. Surprisingly enough, you didn't hear them. You didn't.
Yeah.
You didn't even notice the steam engines coming through. When you noticed them is when there was a wreck somewhere, and there were no trains. Then you suddenly noticed, oh, we haven't heard any trains go through. But there were road gangs working on the railroads, fixing the tracks, whatever had to be done. Pete Viola, who lived here in town, was the boss of one of those gangs. And he knew my father. And his gang was allowed to come and sit under the maple tree in our front yard and have their lunch. But heaven forbid if one of those men would try to talk to me or to my little sister or anything. Pete would chew them out like crazy. You're not supposed to bother these people. But everybody sort of knew everyone in those days.
Yes.
Anybody else have something to share? Please, buddy.
Does anybody have a record of the dances that were put on there by the big bands?
I don't know. Terry, is that in the records that you know of?
No. I mean, we know that it happened. We don't have any
Yeah.
concrete records of When the big bands would tour around the country, we were on that tour.
Yeah, I have no idea. I honestly think people didn't think about keeping records in those days. I'm sure there are records somewhere. Like, I don't know the day that we were annexed into Vermilion. Somebody's got that information. I'm sure it's at the mayor's office, but I don't remember what they were. I was too concerned about.
VOL was known better than Vermilion because of the dance hall and the big bands.
Yeah, I guess it probably was.
Well, then also you had Crystal Beach Ballroom. I can remember we had a couple of rides over there for many years, my father, and I, as a kid, walking up to the dance hall and standing outside by the windows and listening to Guy Lombardo
Yeah.
and the big
Lynette.
bands. Oh my goodness, yes.
That was in later years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Rich, when did the old roller skate and the back there in Crystal Beach burn?
The one in the back.
yeah, that burned in 46, 47, somewhere right there, because that we still lived in Nokomis Park right next to it, right on the lake. And I can remember the sky and the
Oh, the
trees
flames were-
burning, and
right.
yeah, the dance hall and the roller skating rink above it. My sister roller skated there.
I don't think they used that for the big bands, though.
No. The big bands are up at the main ballroom, right on Lake Road there.
When that fire occurred, though, of course, the trees in VOL weren't quite so tall as they are now, but we stood in one of the upstairs bedrooms at my house, and we could see the flames from Crystal Beach, from our house.
Yeah, it was something else.
And I was just a little kid, but I still remember it. Yeah. Yeah. And I was on the second floor of our house. Our house was one of the few full two-story houses down there at the time. There were only 3 or 4 houses that were full two-story houses with an attic like mine was. Of course, now that's not the case, but most of the houses as they were built were the smaller 1.5-story cottages. Anything else? Anyone else want to add something or ask questions? Please, feel free.
I just have one question.
Rich.
Dan, when they were selling everything at Crystal Beach, it's got nothing to do with VOL, except that your dad was involved.
Yeah.
Did you tell people about that just for a minute?
You mean the roller coaster and?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, November 17th, 1962, they had closed the park earlier that summer, and they had this auction, park-wide auction. I can't think of the guy's name, the auctioneer now, Jim Wagner. And we were sitting it was on a Saturday morning, we were sitting at home there having coffee, and Dad very calmly said, well, I'm going to go over and look at the auction. And Mom and I go, well, okay, you want to go, son? Nah, who wants to go to an auction at Crystal Beach? I spent like 7 or 8 years in that place painting white picket fences as a kid, and taking a bucket of water and cleaning out the vomit from the seats when they upchucked, and because Dad had the Spitfire and another ride called the Hammers that went upside down. They spun around
Yeah.
and
Your brother Jimmy used to manage.
Jimmy and Max
run that.
and Max ran it too.
Oh, I didn't remember that.
Oh yeah, I still got Dad's pay log, Max Sheeman's.
Oh.
Yep.
Learn something
See,
new every
you
day.
didn't know that.
No, I
how do
didn't
you
know
think you
that.
afforded college? Anyway, but so make a long story short, Dad went off to the auction and came back about 12:30, 1 o'clock, and Mom says, well, how was the auction? Oh, okay. And she says, did you buy anything? And he says, well, I bought the roller coaster. Just calm. And we laughed. And he reaches in his pocket and he pulls out this sales slip from Jim Wagner, the auctioneer, one roller coaster, $400. And I go, we couldn't believe it, because $400 is a lot of money back in 1962, or at least it seemed like that to me. And so that brought on the roller coaster in the Dean family. My brother Jimmy, my older brother Jimmy, and my dad and I had 2 years to take it down. And we had to get Lloyd's of London insurance to guarantee it. which we did, and we got it down in just over a year. He built out of the scrap. We sold the scrap iron. There were 400 tons of scrap iron. There were 12 wooden cars. We sold each car $100 a piece to a marina in Toledo and Detroit. And they they were all cast iron frames and with wood seating and everything. They took the wood seating out and they built some kind of boat launch system for the marinas. And they'd put the boat in there and launch the boats. That was before these gantry cranes they have today. So that was our roller coaster story.
Anyone else with questions?
Didn't we have to pick our mail up down at the little store before they started mail delivery?
I don't remember that. I remember mail just coming to our house, so I,
When we first moved up here, we had to go down to the little store. 'Cause I remember one of my dad's packs was stolen.
oh,
Someone came in and said they were him at the
I don't recall. We always had a mailbox out on the
yeah, we had a mailbox out on the
on the
curb, so I
street.
don't know.
Yeah, I don't recall
I don't remember that either.
You're talking Urovich's store down there on Edge?
The little store, the corner store.
Yeah, we always called it Urovich's.
told me they had to pick their mail up at the
I don't,
station.
I don't,
I don't know anything about that.
Fire station, but I do remember going down to the little store.
Oh, that's something I didn't know anything about.
they had the nicest candy counter in that store down there. And then a little screened-in porch out front. And you could get like I said, milkshake for 25, 30 cents. And that was a cheap date, you know?
Anything else? Any other questions? Any other remembrances? Girls? Oh, sure we do.
Their father used to have a boat. He'd bring the boat in right there behind the house and take us water skiing.
Oh.
You know, I swallowed more of Lake Erie than I ever want to remember. Oh, my goodness.
That was before algae blooms.
And then the clubhouse in the wintertime, this is another dumb thing, is 12, 13-year-old boys. Charlie Killen and I walked down the street, down to the clubhouse. There's the frozen lake, and it used to freeze right up shore, thick. And we walk out onto that so far. I mean, and then you'd hear crack. It sounded like lightning. And that would be the ice separating. We thought nothing of that. And we'd sit out there and look at that clubhouse from probably a mile out, on just standing on frozen
and they lived
lake.
to tell about it.
And we lived to tell. Yeah. It was amazing.
We did a lot of dumb things in those
Yes,
days.
we did. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I'm still
We
here.
we go up
something.
to the railroad tracks there by your house, and I can remember one time we wanted to flatten a penny, so we put it on the track, you know, and we ran down. There's a ditch there, and we hid in the ditch, and the steam engine went by. You know, we go back up there, and there's no penny. Well, it vibrated off, so we went home, got Scotch tape the next day, and taped it on there. we got our 2
Got your
pennies.
flattened
Yeah, they were 3 times the size.
He just mentioned briefly earlier about the berries and eating the berries and things
Mm.
that grew along there. My mother delighted in going down near to where the fire station is and was, and there were big elderberry bushes
Mm-hmm.
growing down there. And she would pick elderberries, and we would have the most wonderful elderberry pies. Of course, this is in the days before they came along and sprayed the whole area by the tracks. After they started doing that, of course, nothing was edible. And I don't remember the soot on them, but I
Oh,
suspect Mom
yes.
washed them all off.
Yeah, well, yeah.
We didn't have crunchy elderberry pies. They-
We just walked down the center of the railroad tracks and pick
Just
them
grabbed
and
them and
grab
ate
them. But the biggest thing I remember, was the oiling of the streets. About the middle of the summer, they'd bring these great big tanker trucks down there with oil, and most of the streets were tar and gravel. So they would oil it, and I mean that oil was thick.
Thick, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
The street from us, as soon as they put that oil down, before they put the gravel down, they had no Studebaker, and he'd grab it up and down every one of those streets, because they said it was lubricate the
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, well, and it was called tar and chip, and
Yeah.
then once they put down all the stone on top of that tar, you couldn't ride your bikes on it.
No.
I mean,
Tar went everywhere. I mean, you
it just
your
splashed.
shoes, and
yeah.
you couldn't. Oh, my goodness.
It was awful.
Yes.
But that was keeping the roads in good shape. A far cry from the rutted roads that we have in our old Archival Society photographs. If there's nothing else, I guess we can call it
I
a
think we've
night.
bored them enough, don't you?
Probably. We thank you all for coming. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing. Did you all get a chance to see the photographs, the Vermilion on the Lake clubhouse photographs that the girls had? Thank you very much for doing that.